Now that we have discussed what is a business process, and we have also touched briefly upon the wider field of business process management, we can finally get to what is actually process mining itself. To begin with, I will give you a general purpose of process mining, which is analysis and improvement of business processes based on data about business process executions in practice. There is a very good reason why I have highlighted both data and executions in practice. To explain that reason, I will give you an analogy. So this is a picture that I took a few days ago. On this picture, you can see a nice pathway where people have walked in the snow, and now there is a very distinct pathway. The interesting thing about this pathway is that both to the left and also to the right, there are actually paved pedestrian walkways that are cleaned properly. And the assumption would be that people would use those pathways, but instead they have made their own path in the snow, which for some reason they figure is more efficient. And this is a perfect example that you can see in practice when you analyze business processes as well. Whenever you have a business process model that has been handcrafted and the analyst thinks it's a perfect model, then actually in practice the environment changes is one thing, but another thing is that when people are actually enacting that process, they will figure out further optimization opportunities that the process analyst himself or herself didn't figure out. And this path here serves as an analogy for such optimizations. On this picture there is actually one more interesting detail. To the left of this pathway in the snow, you can actually see a single trace where one other person has decided that no, this path in the snow, this is not good enough. I will make my own path. And this is what we would consider like an exception or an exceptional trace, let's say. And when I mentioned in the previous parts of this lecture that you can go to an organization, interview the employees, observe them to figure out what is happening, then in practice, even if you do that, chances are they will not tell you all the exceptions that exist in their work. Even if you observe them, it is very unlikely that you are going to observe an exception that occurs only once a week or once a month or even once a year. And that is the reason why we have to rely on actual data about business process executions in practice. But to make it a bit more concrete, let's think about, or let me give you a broad understanding of how process mining came to be, and this will directly lead into what is process mining. So at some point in time, we figured out that organizations already use enterprise systems to support their business processes. Those systems include ERP systems that support production, delivery, or payroll processes, and, for example, CRM systems that support marketing, sales, or customer services. Now, these systems have actually been in place for decades, long before the field of process mining or the set of techniques known as process mining came to be. But we figured out that those systems, indeed, they exist, and those systems also record data about the processes that they support, including order to cash, purchase to pay, and so forth. For example, if we think about an IT support desk, then they will have a ticket system that will record when a ticket was submitted, when someone started working on that ticket, what was the resolution of that ticket, and so forth. All of this data can be used to analyze the processes themselves. So process mining, as a result, is a family of techniques that uses data recorded by enterprise systems to discover and analyze the business processes supported by these systems in order to identify performance, conformance issues, track down the root causes, so the causes of those issues, and find improvement opportunities. How does it work? What are the steps that have to be in place before we can actually employ process mining techniques? First of all, process logging. Depending on the system, you might already have this in place. IT support desk that will have a system in place that at least partially records the required information. Once you have that, you need to perform data collection. In this step, you are going to generate something that is called an event log, and we will cover on the next slide. Once you have an event log, you still have to do data preparation. You have to work with that event log based on the needs or actual business requirements. What is it that you are actually analyzing? For example, are you analyzing your processes at a very high level, or are you looking at a very fine-grained granular level? And this kind of changes how you operate. Data preparation is something that we will cover briefly in this lecture series. However, it is not the main focus. The main focus instead is process mining, which allows us to utilize or do automated process discovery and allows us to utilize other types of analysis to discover and analyze the processes themselves. And now, I said that I mentioned the term event log. So we have to briefly mention what an event log actually is. So event log essentially is a data table with its columns and everything. But there are three main columns that are very important. First of all, case ID. Case ID is essential because we have to understand to what business process this row in the table belongs to, and more specifically, what is the precise process instance. So in an IT support desk, it could be the ID of the ticket that is being processed. Another thing that we need is the timestamp. We need to know when something happened, when an activity was performed. And obviously, we need a column for the activity itself. We need to understand what activity was finally performed. There are other columns that I will not touch upon in this lecture. However, in the future lectures, we can see what is the use of those columns as well. But now, let's get an overview of process mining itself. So we have an enterprise system. It has some historical data, but it also can have live data. And both of these data sets we can utilize using process mining algorithms. The algorithms themselves, the hard details of the algorithms, how they build the algorithms and so forth, this we will not get into too much. However, what we are interested in is the actionable process knowledge that we can gain by utilizing these algorithms. And this takes many forms. For example, we can get a process model, and this we can get it automatically. Usually it is in the form of a process map, where we see the activities that belong to this process. We see how often those activities are performed, and we can also see how they follow each other and how often a specific path is going to be taken in the process. Of course, if you're familiar with something called business process, or if you're familiar with the business process management itself, you should be familiar with the BPMN notation as well. And those, let's say, formal models, you can also discover automatically. They have some benefits over the simple process map, but also some drawbacks, and those we will discuss in later lectures. Another aspect, or another piece of actionable knowledge that we can get is performance measurements. For example, if we have a process map and we have timestamps of when the activities have been performed, then we can aggregate those timestamps and figure out the average duration of each of those activities. Also, we can figure out the average duration between different activities. And this can be very useful when we are working with the process performance and we want to measure something. An alternative result that usually occurs in performance mining is something called process performance dashboards. And this takes the form of various charts, usually. For example, in this picture, we can see cases over time. So that would be at any given point in time, let's say 12th of January, how many cases were actively being worked on. So cases that had started but not yet finished. Also, we can see resource utilization to figure out who are the people who are doing the most work in our process. Also, we can take a look at, say, activities, their average durations in the form of a chart, which can help us to understand which activities are the most expensive ones in our process. Now, I know that this is quite a bit of information, and don't worry if you don't remember everything from this lecture. Both automated process discovery, performance mining, and all the things that I'm going to talk about next, those will be covered in upcoming lectures in far greater detail than in this lecture. Here, the purpose is just to give you an overview of what the wider field is capable of. So coming to the next actionable process knowledge, it would be a conformance report. This is done by the technique called conformance checking. Usually what we do in this technique, we take a process model that represents the process as it is intended, let's say. And then we compare it to the process map that we automatically got from the process discovery. And for example, in here, we can already see that in actuality, there are two activities that do not occur in the model, but they exist in the process map. And also we can see that there is a wide number of different pathways, none of which, or most of which, have not been planned in advance. So this gives us an indication of where to look, where are the exceptions, and how to improve the process in the future. The next set of actionable process knowledge is differences and root causes. What we can do here, we can employ, for example, variant analysis. Let's say we have a company that works in 3 different countries, but does the same process in all of them. And let's say in country A, the process is vastly more efficient than in all the other countries. So what we can do, we could split up the data that we have by country and get multiple different process maps and then figure out what are the differences. And in here, we can also use the performance dashboards and other methodologies. And in this slide, you can, for example, see a very simple example where we have simple repairs versus complex repairs and how the process maps differ in those cases. Now, a related technique is what-if process mining. This allows us to figure out, if we want to do a change, we have figured out that this is probably a good change. Reordering the activities in a different way, this would be a good change to do. We have figured that out, or at least we think we have. Then we can create a what-if model that corresponds to the changes that we want to enact. We can define a simulation scenario, run the simulation, analyze the simulation outputs, and then repeat it for alternative scenarios in case we have multiple different options for improvements. And what this tells us, or what it allows us to do, is to confirm if those changes that we are planning, if they are actually worthwhile. The reason why you would want to do it like this is because in some cases, actually enacting the changes might be very costly. Let's say, for example, in a factory, to change the manufacturing pipeline, to change the machines, the locations, replace the machines and all that, that can be a very expensive process. Where instead, it might be far better to just run the simulation first and see if it's even worth trying. And finally, probably the most advanced topic that we are going to cover is predictions. So predictive process monitoring, I will not get into the details of it here, but what it allows us to do is to answer questions such as how likely is it that a running process will become deviant? So it will deviate from the course that we have actually planned for it. Or will it end up in a negative outcome? Or will it fail to meet its SLAs in the next 24 hours? Or will it generate abnormal effort, costs, or rework? And those things we can predict based on different machine learning techniques and other techniques. This is a bit of an advanced topic, and here we will also get into a bit of a programming with Python. And finally, I will give you an overview of the structure of the course. This week, we were in the introductory lecture to just lay the groundwork, where we are and what we are planning to do. In the second week, we are looking more in depth into performance measurements and dashboards. Then we will get into process mining proper. On week 3, we will go over the main concepts and capabilities of process mining. This will be a general overview where you get to pretty much see everything in action, but we will not explain too much how everything works, and we will not point out all the details. Instead, the details will be dedicated towards specific lectures. So in week 4, we will have automated discovery. In week 5, conformance checking. Then performance mining. Then what-if process mining. After what-if process mining, we will take a small detour. We will go towards extracting and transforming and loading a process model or an event log for the purposes of process mining. The reason why we take this detour here is that we want to show some of the ways that the event logs need to be pre-processed or can be pre-processed. We'll be showing you some tricks and some common operations that are done. This will be done in Python and will prepare us to predictive monitoring. However, in week 9, we will discuss something called declarative process mining. Now, declarative process mining is a slightly different way of looking at the processes. It is, let's say, constraint or rule-based. It has its advantages, but also its disadvantages. This lecture is intended to give you a broad overview of what it is and how it works. After that, we will continue working with Python on predictive process monitoring. And week 10 will be dedicated fully towards that, solving different tasks that you can do with predictive monitoring. Then we will discuss briefly different process mining algorithms and the ins and outs of those algorithms, how they came to be, how they work. And this is intended to give you an understanding of what their capabilities are and how they work. Then we will give an overview of how process mining is actually used in practice. And finally, we will have a course recap and give you an overview of future trends in the area of process mining. This concludes the first lecture. Thank you very much for your attention, and I hope it was especially interesting, and I hope to see you all next week.